The next panel to close out the day is called Metadata and Dragnet Surveillance, the most powerful weapon in cyber war. We're going to go ahead and have the folks start to introduce themselves. So let's start on the far left.
Good morning. My name is David Rubal. I'm the Chief Technologist of Data and Analytics at DLT. I'm also a data scientist, and one of the other hats that I wear out in this space as a CISSP, very active in this conversation in everything that is cybersecurity, NetSec to AppSec to IoTSec to CloudSec to all of it. I'm particularly interested about that intersection of cybersecurity and data management as it pertains to some of the things that we've been talking about here today, which we'll be covering in this panel and this discussion, so I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. To David's right is Tim Hill.
Hi, my name's Tim Hill, and I've come from Centrify. I'm a product manager there, and I'm relatively new to Centrify. For those people that know Centrify and have seen them here recently. I actually have a background as an information security manager, director of security in healthcare previously, and prior to that, the student loan industry, and then prior to that, industrial electronics. And then, of course, for Bill's sake, I'm an Air Force person, and that's where I started my career.
Excellent. Finally, James.
Yeah, James Scott, Senior Fellow, ICIT. Congressional advisor. I'm an advisor with NATO, different European Union states, and the intel community on cyber warfare and some cybersecurity.
Yep. And James is also the primary author, as you know, of the Institute's papers, including the one that we'll be discussing today. So, James, as the author, I'm going to have you kick off with the first question here. For those of you who have read the paper and read many of the Institute's publications, this is a topic that we have really delved into over the last several months in particular. So James, can you start talking about who represents the biggest national security and general population threat when it comes to metadata curation and weaponization, and why? Why is that threat there?
Yeah, I think the most potent culprits for Dragnet surveillance, the downside of Dragnet surveillance are the Dragnet surveillance capitalists. Facebook, Microsoft, Google. It's one thing to curate metadata. It's another thing to not protect, Equifax, for example. It's another thing to not protect those treasure troves of data. A hacker, a nation state, cyber mercenaries, sophisticated cyber criminal gangs coming out of Asia, Eastern Bloc, South America now. They're not going to wait to purchase scrubbed data. They're going to go into the networks and exfiltrate it in real time. Russia is interesting because they're not the only ones putting out fake news, propaganda, that sort of thing. China's in there. Iran is coming into the propaganda game heavy. Most respectable nation states, even smaller ones, respectable enough from an ethical perspective, but if you look at North Korea, for example, they are a nation state. They're launching influence operations to have a foreign impact. They're familiar with the techniques of, for example, Cambridge Analytica, where you can take all of this metadata, put it into big data analytics, and psychographically target with specific algorithms population, alt-right, Antifa, and you can message continuously and seamlessly. So.
Great. So that's good, and I do agree with the approach. So what we have to understand, of course, is that there are hermit states that are we consider headline news, but when it boils down to is we have nation state sponsored APTs, we have terrorist organizations, and of course there's the criminal sector that's collecting metadata. They're collecting it from sometimes right in front of your faces. Having come from the healthcare industry, I know that firsthand that's what's taking place. It's that collective across these environments where we see exploited data coming out of medical. We have Facebook. We have all of these other social types of environments that are allowing you to put together a much bigger picture, a better picture of who all of you are. okay? And what your weaknesses are, and from that, tailor and target whatever type of information that they want to use with you to influence you in your decision making, be it political or otherwise. And it's kind of a scary place for everyone to be right now, and I think it's probably, there's more to come on this as we see right now. Having just come from the commercial industry, I know that there's a big push amongst data brokers out there inside of companies to have massive amounts of individual data to turn it into a commodity that they haven't sold yet. Okay, so they're trying to figure out how to turn that information into a commodity that can be purchased over and over again. And I think from a commercial industrial maturity level, they're not where they should be before they enter into that fray.
Great points and great work here, James. So, you know, from my view of things, as I mentioned, I'm kind of looking at this from many sides of the conversation. There's a couple of things I'd like to point out in the conversation of metadata. So metadata is the story of data. It's the specifics of the data. And we're brought up, and we have been in the industry, to protect the core data itself. In reality, you have to make sure that you are addressing both that core data piece, but also the protection of that metadata. Sometimes it doesn't always get the level of focus in organizations because, again, we're very conditioned to, you know, do full packet capture, store everything off. I've checked the box and I'm good. Well, in reality, you're probably more vulnerable than you think, and unless you're actually taking a separate layer of steps to protect that metadata. And from the vulnerability perspective, and some great examples there from your comments in the healthcare space, we have to assume, I think, at this point that the data that we have isn't safe. And then what? How do we take additional actions and additional steps to protect it? Because data is being sold on our behalf, whether it's in social media or it's in our public profiles that we need for us to be able to operate in our roles. But then the next progression, and you see the industry's drumbeat starting to get louder around trust models, something like blockchain, and how, coming from the financial side, how do trust models play in this scenario where if we are going to be protecting everything that is, whether PII data, PHI data, and everything that's supposed to be private, how then can we actually morph it and take advantage of the trust model approach? Some pretty interesting conversations in the industry today. It's very early stage, but I think there's some potential here for us to definitely explore. And then the third point I'll make just very quickly from the metadata use perspective. The algorithmic approach, and there were several comments in the earlier sessions around use of machine learning technologies and kind of bringing the algorithm to the problem. It's not just us that's using them, it's also the adversaries. These algorithms, these tools are very easy to develop. They're developed in open source. There's not a whole lot of paper trail associated with them, and they can be deployed very easily. So getting into, again, kind of resetting our expectations that the predictive analytics aspect that we, again, talked about as being key to really achieving the level of cyber intelligence and cyber visibility that we need is occurring from the adversary side as well. So it gives us an opportunity, I think, to really kind of light up the conversation again. And is it going to be the battle of the algorithms? Is it going to be the place where, if we can predict even more combinations of that 360-degree view, biometrics, identity access management, core enterprise security, cybersecurity protection, all that north, south, and east-west protection that we're doing in our environments, all together, including behavioral analysis, to have that full view and have that type of predictive environment as the next generation of this conversation.
So, gentlemen, I think the community is starting to understand and connect the dots between what used to be viewed as seemingly disparate attacks and incidents, and starting to understand how an adversary, particularly a more sophisticated one, could maybe layer the data and bring it together to increase the impact of these attacks and of their campaigns. So let's talk about, what is a scenario where they can layer data from social media, OPM, EHR data, voter registration logs, ISPs that are out there, and what could they do with that from a layering perspective?
Yeah, sure. So data, metadata, what's happening is they're taking this data, putting it into big data. They're customizing and playing with algorithms right now. You have not just, for example, your metadata from your ISP or Google or whatever, but also the traditional data from your purchases with your credit cards and your Amazon searching metadata, your purchase data. What this can be used for from an espionage perspective is for an actor can decide, okay, I want to hit, I have a payload that attacks the grid, or the Russian perspective of monitoring without interfering. What you can do is target certain executives that have elevated privileges within those grid operators. So the way you would do it is always use LinkedIn. That's pretty easy to do. But you take that data, exfiltrate it from the network itself. If you can get access to the Equifax data, use that. And what you want to do is the algorithm will zero in on the admins. And then from there, it depends. The smash and grab characteristics of the Chinese hacking, that they will spearfish in volume. So they burn a lot of contacts that way and lose a lot of chances just to get the click. The click would then deliver the malicious payload to the network, and then it would be a compiled, malware keylogger. If you look up hammer toss, that's a pretty sophisticated energy tool, reaches out to Twitter, uses steganography. But the Russian style is much more sophisticated and chess-like. What they'll do is they'll literally set up a recruiting website. And it's usually a spoofed name, looks like a normal executive recruiting firm. And then what they'll do is they'll lead with a phone call. Hey, we're sending you an offer, this company over here, keep it on the down low, don't let anybody know. They don't want the guy that's in this position to know that he's going to be replaced. And so the recipient is ready to click on that PDF that contains the payload. So all of this information that we're talking about, the metadata and the data, the more data you have, the tighter the algorithm, which means the more targeted and successful the campaign will be.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not sure I can add a lot to that, but I will say that the whole idea is that convergence of the metadata that exists on each and every one of us, and how it can turn into an exploit. But when we converge that in with humans, right? So now we bring in the actual person who's going to contact you or contact a group of people and start exploiting that vulnerability like a salesperson would. And that's where I think the real threat's starting to generate. If probably everyone in this room probably gets 2 or 3 cold calls at least a week. And some of those cold calls, in fact, could be adversarials that are trying to get a little bit of more information from you for that next piece of metadata that they need to add to the picture.
Yeah, and as we're talking about the vulnerabilities associated with metadata, and to the comments made earlier, and the Equifax breach, the ones prior, to the most part, were about taking data. The conversation is shifting because of the focus on the control of that metadata around changing data. So if I'm a hacker and if I can breach the system, what may be more interesting to me, instead of actually stealing that core data, is actually changing that metadata and changing it on the fly to the point where I can then manipulate it and use it to my benefit on the outside. And this, the broad use of metadata across the board, as we were talking about all these different sources and getting back to the kind of the core question, is everything we do today, everything we touch electronically, everything we interact with, right down to all of our experiences as consumers is all generating big data and metadata associated with it. So this is the new reality of society that we have in front of us. But as an IT community, I think it's a chance for us to ensure that we make it as hard as possible to be able to get access to that metadata, because again, it is kind of the gold nugget associated with what you have and what you are and what you own. And finally, that changing aspect of metadata, I think, has a lot of implications. It definitely has national security implications because, as things get breached, it gets a little bit more serious. On the critical infrastructure side, energy systems and all. So it's not where we can wait necessarily. We have to bring the metadata conversation from a cyber threat intelligence perspective into the mainstream. And as we've all developed great reference models and architectures and defense and depth strategies, and all from the enterprise security perspective, we also need to have that same type of approach to protect the metadata.
Good.
So there's been a tremendous amount of focus recently on Dragnet surveillance and retroactive legislation like SJ Res 34. Wondering if you can comment on how this could possibly impede national cybersecurity, resiliency of our sectors, and just basic privacy of our citizens.
Go again.
Yeah, sure. Sure. SJ Res 34 was shocking. It's shocking that passed with no resistance whatsoever, because what it did was it validated ISPs, notoriously cyber hygienically apathetic, to curate metadata on all of their users while simultaneously charging them a fee each month for the pleasure. So you're paying Comcast for the service, and they're monetizing off of your surfing, whether it's through, the obvious with, ads. They can scan your email, automated bot will scan your email and deliver an ad for travel if it sees that you're getting tickets or whatever. But I think the problem on the Hill is, for me personally, when I'm in the offices that we as an institute advise to, they're just now wrapping their minds around cyber hygiene. Metadata is something they don't understand, the weaponization capability and what nation states are able to do from a perception management, perception steering, influence operations, political warfare, information warfare. That's the new war. The new war is a cyber kinetic meta war, and it's permanent. It's a permanent state that we as a globe, a planet, are going to be in. And it's the thing that concerns me is the lack of intellectual capital within the offices on the Hill and committees with true, real cyber experts who understand espionage and understand how to actually facilitate these actions in order to demonstrate it to whoever the congressman or the senator that they're reporting to.
Right. So one of the things I look at when I look at an ISP is the ISP has access to all of us at our homes every single day, and even a lot of small companies that do very small networks. I think the challenge we see there is that they have access to you when you're using the internet and all of the Internet of Things in your house that are using the internet. They have access to information about you when you're scheduling appointments with your doctors, when you're scheduling appointments with lawyers, because you're using the internet to do those things. They have access to you when you're actually working because you're using VPN to get in. So they have a much bigger picture of you that when you start taking that metadata and merging it with other sources, it gives them a better view and increases their risk to some of our key assets across the United States, which are those administrators that have infrastructure access, and those administrators that are actually working every day with data, because the nature of companies today is that we have most of our workers 2 to 3 days a week are working from their homes. And their systems sometimes are left on, but disconnected then from that secure VPN source. And they're using it not only for work, but they're also using it for that incidental browsing of the internet. Now we've exposed a whole nother data stream to the ISP that they can turn around and sell as a resource.
Yeah, and to add to that, and really, the impact and the implication is much broader than even just the traditional ISP and the telecom ISP train. It's the cloud providers. It's the content owners. And to the point that was made earlier around the reality is that with the control of metadata, it fundamentally creates the recommendation system, the recommendation society that we're living in. Everything we consume, when it's interesting whenever you visit a website once and then you may be out shopping somewhere and that website comes right back up because it knows, right, that your profile of your preferences and your interests are in certain areas. We're only scratching the surface here. Now, we look at this from the control of the content and what that recommendation content means behind the scenes. Consumer-wise, I think there's a series of benefits potentially that could be services and citizen services related, especially in smart city models and as we make the infrastructure smarter. But the other side of it is that, and to the point made, where you don't necessarily have control about the information that's being sold that is about you in the ISP environment. And from a privacy perspective, that's one of the things that really raised a yellow flag with me when I saw this going through the Hill, was the gradual loss of privacy of your information and really your user experience, your customer experience in buying services from the ISPs.
So today in virtually all the sessions, we've talked a bit about the different actors that are out there. So how does this topic, how does metadata impact their ability to recruit and in some cases, radicalize folks that are out there?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. As my comment earlier around that 360-degree view of the profile, it does include all aspects of social media. It does include all of our online behaviors. It does include everything that's searchable about us. So from a social engineering perspective, we can virtually be pretty easily gotten to and then attracted. And it may, some of the things that I've read around the different attempts at campaigns to be able to recruit people, it starts as just a small phishing attempt. And it continually builds so that people get more interested because we are curious and we do like to stay engaged, but not really understanding that it's part of a bigger mission, a bigger campaign.
Right. So I agree. It's the idea of what do we believe in,
yeah.
and can somebody promote that idea with us, and can it be used to drive us toward a particular action.
Yeah, I think from a nation-state perspective, this is also a place where special interest groups chime in. If you look at Cyber Caliphate and the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, it's one thing that they try to do is sow concentrated, cancerous clusters of chaos. I didn't actually even mean to do all those C's at one time. But that's literally, and that's the point. So chaos all the time, playing up the idea of xenophobia. They can use that to their advantage for recruiting. Metadata is also key to the next generation for lone wolf recruiting. I'm really surprised that the FBI isn't taking this threat more seriously. Because what you can do is set up plug-and-play recruiting, starting with the first place that extremists go, whether it's Antifa or any of these extremist groups, the alt-right, whatever, I don't know, whatever. But one thing that you can do is, trying to take a book and consolidate it into like 2 sentences. One thing, many things that you can do. You basically, you take an extremist individual. The plan is to get them to act out. So you have the self-radicalizing individual. Metadata can help bad actors target the individual or groups of them. You don't have to necessarily target an individual, you just have to know where they're at. Twitter, Facebook, follow different hashtags. The objective then becomes to deliver them an ideological variant that's just a little more perverted and extreme than the content that they're currently looking at. And what you do is, using metadata and targeting these people, you can measure the extreme that they're at, and you know when they're ready to act. Then you pull them off, and then you pretty much put them on one of the hidden forums on the dark web, for example. And that's where they actually will have cybernetic, or they'll learn technical skills, and you can find out, will this person be part of the cyber caliphate, or will they be a self-radicalized lone wolf actor that will actually operate or carry out an act under the ISIS moniker or something. Yeah, I could go on and on about cyber caliphate and the extremists. So.
Yeah, one of the books we have outside is actually our book on, I can't remember the title, Cyber Jihad.
Yeah.
If you're interested in this topic in particular, that's a great one. It's a compilation of 3 different papers that the Institute put out over the year. Obviously, particularly in the last panel, we talked about kind of the critical infrastructure sectors that are out there and how they're being impacted. So how do meta exploits expedite nation-state attacks on some of the sectors that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, it just zeroes in on again, the critical infrastructure executive with elevated privileges. So that's what it does. And so it shortens the time from the idea of malware, for example, to shortening the time to get the admin or C-suite member to click on the malicious payload. And it's also used for, especially now with the Equifax breach, you're able to take that data, compile it with the rest of the metadata and other data, and you can find critical infrastructure executives who are maybe having financial problems. And so you can offer them a way out. Hey, look, all you have to do is take this USB drive, put it in the back of this computer. It's not even on your floor, different department. You know, and so that's what it can do. It can help with recruiting insider threats and also expediting the malicious payload activity.
Great. So it's time to the actual discovery, and then it shortens that time to discovery. Then it improves the opportunity for exploitation because there's such a level of data that's available.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I think through this too, there's a value chain of metadata along the way, because it becomes a point of power, and if an attacker can leverage the access to data and then leverage the data itself, it's like the perfect match. And if the data doesn't exist, then it's actually, from a data mining perspective and a data creation perspective, to be able to create some data that is relatively close but may miss the mark a bit, but look an awful lot like what the source data potentially could be, which again introduces other dangers and associated with creating false profiles, fake news. I mean, all of the examples that we're seeing play out in real life today.
So we just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to jump to the final question that we have prepared. And I think, David, I'll start with you and work our way down. Okay. Based on all the conversations, not just on this panel, but that we've heard over the course of the day, what, in your perspective, does a future war space look like, given the changing dynamics of our culture and society?
So it's, I think the future of war space and the future of the cyber war space is one that's real time. It's one that's big data intensive and data intensive. It's interesting whenever you talk to agencies, you talk to companies, you talk to people that kind of look at the cyber intelligence piece is kind of one thing or another. It usually falls into the cyber bucket. Well, as it turns out, cybersecurity is a data-intensive event. So you also have to ensure that your data management environment is modernized to the point where streaming data is possible in your environment, real-time data, the use of the nefarious use of the Internet of Things is ahead of us. Right now, it's about innovation and getting all these cool capabilities of some of the examples that were given earlier. But right behind this, because a lot of these devices aren't designed with security in mind. So they tend to increase the vulnerability space, the open target space to be able to be compromised, to be leveraged, and then maybe even developed as a set of capabilities on their own from a warfare perspective. And this affects everything from sensors and drones and everything that potentially could be part of a network or access to a network.
So that's good. That's very good. I think when we look at the data, in the future use of data, people will get much better, probably through machine learning, of what is long life information versus short life information. Prioritize the short life information because that's immediately exploitable. It affects people's decisions, their rapid decisions, but it also, I'm thinking back to my time in the health insurance industry. It actually builds this sort of model of pole vaulting from the weakest link up to I think the target of the attack. That leads to the exfiltration of, billions and billions of records from something. It's the time to success, right? That's really what we're going to see is a company will have an event, and within minutes, they'll be in the headlines, not months and months later, because there's the opportunity to gain access to the data they want, exploit the data, and if the company doesn't agree to whatever potentially they're being asked to do ransomware-wise, then it'll just be made public, which also allows people to short them in the stock market.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the leader of the technological curve wins the war. So I think that the war that is coming, I think we're already in, and it's a multi-vector, it has the multi-vector potency of the cyberkinetic meta war space with the unlimited possibility of artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous vehicles, technology systems, and I think that what you'll see that as part of the offensive will be the only thing that can defend against it. And traditional warfare as we know it, you only bring guns and bombs into a country if they have no technological infrastructure, no financial sector, infrastructure, or if they have some type of oil reserve or something important to our national security and economy. This war that we're in is going to be a perpetual one, and it's going to be an exhaustive one. And most nation states aren't going to be able to handle the swings, the expense, or the intellectual capital that they need in order to defend against this type of cyberkinetic metadata offensive. So
yeah, and we are working on some additional research that's coming out kind of around these themes, so keep an eye out for that. Please help me in thanking our panelists. And with that, we'll go ahead and formally wrap up for the morning. Again, we do have the Bloody Marys and a breakfast over there. There are the 4 roundtables. We'll be setting up the signs for the 4 topics. We have one on artificial intelligence, machine learning, one on remote browsers, where we heard a lightning talk on, one on protecting data through ICAM and other methods, and a final one on IT-OT convergence. So grab your food and drinks, engage in the roundtables, and we'll chat shortly. Thank you very much.